I've been pondering how we should use this book of Ecclesiastes and not simply abuse and dismiss it. And so what I think may help us is to think about that period of time in your life. And I don't know when it would have occurred. It could have occurred when you were a teenager or in the middle of your life, or it could be occurring now. When you really set up and took notice of the difference that sometimes came across as a dissonance between what you've been taught to believe and what your life experience is showing you. Now, this is a natural confrontation that we all have to go through, because our faith is just something that we learned and swallowed and didn't test personally. It's probably a pretty flimsy faith. The faith that we need has to face those difficult losses that will come our way, the limitations of our aging, of our financial circumstances, of our social circumstances, the all manner of losses and challenges that we'll face. Our faith has to be rugged enough to stand in good stead of those things. And the teacher in Ecclesiastes, I've decided I'm just going to refer to the author as the teacher, has dedicated himself to looking at what his tradition that he's received is and comparing it with a real critical, rational mind to what experience he has taught him and what he has observed from experience. He's, in a way, seeking to uncover what gives either theology, if it's God-centered, or philosophy, if it's not God-centered, how you can hold on to positions without becoming overwhelmed by the absurdity and the difficulties of life. So today we're going to, well, first of all, let's review what we did last week. Last week we talked about for everything there is a time, and we saw that in the context of not God pointing out particular moments for you and you and you, but rather a time that flows in rather predictable cycles, and yet God somehow is sovereign over that. We also talked about the hiddenness of God, how God has set eternity within our hearts, but we're incapable of grasping all of eternity. We begin to deal with the teacher's sense of injustice and unrighteousness, and today we'll do more on that. And he suggested as one of the motivations for our ceaseless work and toil and striving was envy of another. We're going to test out, and we'll have a bit more positive spin on that. But that's some of the work that we did last week. This week, we're going to investigate the human resources and the capacities that can be discovered in this intellectual conquest that he's on. So rather than just doing the description of how life is, this chapters 4 and 5 begin to give us some insights into what do we as humans also have as a resource within a world that's hard to understand. So we're going to talk about the value of human companionship and community. We're going to talk about some of the surprising reversals that occur in life. In other words, the person who looks like they ought to succeed doesn't, and the one that you thought least likely to succeed does. He's going to cover the importance of how we use our language, what speech is for, and he's going to recommend silence and contentment. And there's another exploration of absurdity that points to a value that he has stressed, but now takes even more seriously, the value of joy. So today there's a few more positive lights in Ecclesiastes. We'll start at verse 7, and I'm going to read through 12. And my subtitle in the commentary I was using called this Solitude and Solidarity. Again, I saw the vanity under the sun, the case of solitary individuals, without sons or brothers, yet there is no end to all their toil, and their eyes are never satisfied with riches. For whom am I toiling, they ask, and depriving myself of pleasure? This is also vanity and an unhappy business. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. If they fall, one will lift up the other. But woe to the one who is alone and falls and does not have another to help. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? And though one might prevail against another, two will withstand one. The threefold cord is not quickly broken. Let's break this down a little bit. Just in the verses that precede verse 7, the teacher had made a contrast between the fool who just resigns himself or herself to whatever happens in life, and the workaholic who just energizes and commits to working and working and working. And the fool ends up, in the metaphor in verse 5, eating himself, because he never gets around to getting the food that he needs to nourish himself. And in 6, the workaholic never even gets, although their hands are full of things, they never have contentment. So better a handful with quiet, meaning contentment, than 2 handfuls and a chasing after the wind. So he's just done this. And now he turns to examine the solitary, individualistic life. Now this is not meant to be the single individual as opposed to the married individual. It's not about that. It is about a stance in life that does not open up to include others. So it is solitary or self-centered, self-assured, self-possessed. And the teacher says this concludes as an unhappy life. If you don't have someone or someones to share your life with and give your life a sense of meaning and purpose, you will just be struggling and struggling and struggling to satisfy yourself. In contrast, those who have colleagues or companions or partners in life, they abound with resources for help and protection and warmth and strength. What we get from others are the things that we can't give to ourselves. Now, in his culture, it was almost impossible to think of yourself independently. as if I'm all that matters. Because the families were so integrated, the neighborhoods were so dependent upon one another. When you're not living by paying money for everything, but I'll do your mending for you if you'll plant my garden for me. If you're always bartering, your relationships have to be kept in tune. And if you notice that I'm unable to do the mending, you might still do my garden, right? So there's all of this interwovenness. The typical Jewish person in biblical times doesn't think of themselves as an individual, but as a part of the whole. So the choice then to be solitary, to be a rugged individual, was very unusual and considered very sinful almost. It was a betrayal of the community. In our mindsets, to be self-sufficient and independent is a good thing. We raise our children to be independent from us. And we want to see them as adults who can manage themselves. I had a friend in Pittsburgh whose daughter came out to Arizona and lived with a Navajo family for a summer internship. And the daughter stopped to visit with me before going back to Pittsburgh. And she was full of this experiment. And her mother had, said, no, when you go off to college, you're independent. You're on your own. You make your own choices from that point on, da, 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 da. And the Native American woman, the mom and the family that she was so shocked that anybody would say such a thing to a child. And she said, you can always come home here. But that's a demonstration of the mom, of course, in Pittsburgh would welcome her daughter home at any time, right? And she would be there for her daughter. But the training in independence versus the training in corporate responsibility was really stunning for this young woman to observe. That's the kind of difference. Does that help make sense of it? So, part of our exploration, positive exploration with this test is to really stop and think about what benefits we receive by being in community. Chapter 4, beginning at 13 through the end of the chapter. Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who will no longer take advice. One can indeed come out of prison to reign, even though born poor in the kingdom. I saw all the living who move about under the sun follow that youth who replaced the king. And there was no end to all those people whom he led, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also vanity and a chasing after the wind. We're moving into a little tiny parable, and if you're thinking about it, it's pretty easy to name who would be this youthful king that rises up. Well, really, there are two answers, aren't there? There's Joseph, thrown in prison, and this says taken out of prison, and by Pharaoh, and then becomes Pharaoh's right-hand manager. And the other would be David, the least of Jesse's sons, the youngest, who then became the monarch. So this is the one time when the history of Israel is playing in the background. Remember, this is a person doing the intellectual work, but is still an individual of faith, and this time he can't deny it. he really has to use this illustration that comes out of his own faith tradition in order to kind of discount some of the philosophical distinctions that say, if you're born well and you're bred well and you're well educated, you will succeed, and if you're not, you won't. And he has looked at life and seen numerous instances where the one who shouldn't have succeeded did, and the one who was groomed for success failed. So he's simply saying, if you look at life, you cannot have these lenses on that you know all the answers. Instead, watch what happens. Unlikely things happen. And then, of course, being this particular teacher, he says, and that's a vanity as well, a chasing after the wind. To assume that, oh, there'll be a surprise is as vain or as incomprehensible as to say there won't be. Verses 5, 1 through 7. And this also opens the door. We've seen a little bit of the history of Israel in the last 2 verses. Now we're going to see a little bit of the liturgical life. Guard your steps when you go into the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than the sacrifice offered by fools. For they do not know how to keep from doing evil. Never be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. For dreams come with many cares, and a fool's voice with many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay in fulfilling it. For God has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill what you vow. It's better that you should not vow than you should vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin. Do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your words and destroy the work of your hands? With many dreams come vanities and a multitude of words, but fear God. Well, there have been infrequent mentions of God in these first 4 verses. So I took the time to collect the few that were there. And some of them are a bit contradictory. In chapter 1, verse 13, we said that God has given to everyone the unhappy business of toil. And remember before I said toil is more like life as it is, life's purposes, life's progress. That was the first one. Then God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy, but not to all, because the fool or the sinner or the empty ones don't have enough insight to even experience joy. That's 2:24 and 26. Then in 3, last week, God sets eternity within the heart, yet without the understanding thereof. Also in the 3rd chapter, we had the first encounter with God gives simple pleasures, eat, drink, and have enjoyment. In 14 and 15 of chapter 3, God's sovereign over time and over space. And in 17 and 18, God is the judge and the tester of human hearts. So there have been some comments, but God has not played very much. Now suddenly, we're in the house of God, which makes us think that, oh,
I guess the worship life of the community is going on, and this man participates in it. This teacher goes to worship. So we're face to face with the religious establishment, and given what we have been trained by reading the teacher's work, we should have expected some kind of scathing analysis of the worship, but we get just the opposite. We get these charming little cautionary moments. Instead of ridiculing what worship is, oh, it's just a pageant, it's just a play, it's just a good musical production. We get instead someone who thinks about how it is. Guard your steps, don't approach lightly, keep silence, don't be too chatty before God, but listen, come into worship in order to listen. And then of course, towards the end, there's an explosion of vanities instead of having an explosion of vanities, he just says, silence is better. So why is there this shift going on right here? I think his answer is hidden in one little phrase, for God's in heaven while you're on earth. You do not have the perspective. So at this moment, when you are engaged in worship, monitor yourself so that you can receive what worship has to offer, which is a tiny glimpse of God's ways and God's word. So it's really a very humbling perspective that he puts out. He does also in this section does a whole understanding of vows. Now, vows are not something that we do much of. We honor certain vows, like marriage vows, like ordination vows, but we're not a people who are trained to kind of say, God, I'm going to do this for you. Sometimes during Lent we decide we'll adopt a practice, and I'm going to get up every morning a half an hour earlier so I can read scripture. And so, sometimes we make it through, 2-3 weeks doing that. But his point is that vowing, saying you're going to do something to God, can never be taken lightly. And I think in his religious orientation, vows were much more important. That you took a vow to take care of your neighbor, or you took a vow to, they would take vows to let their hair grow, which in a desert culture where you don't bathe frequently can be a very uncomfortable thing. It could end up in a dreadlocky kind of thing. But there were lots of vows that could be taken, and it was important. And what he's stressing here is, if you make a vow, you better keep the vow. Remember the parable of Jesus where he says that there was, the father comes to his 2 sons and he asks one to go and do a certain thing, and he says, no, I'm not doing that. And then he asks the other son to do it, and the other son says, yep, I'll do that. And then the one who said, I'm not doing it, goes off and does it, and the one who said he was going to doesn't do it. It's kind of like that. Be true to your word. It's better if you don't make a vow and fulfill it, and complete what you would have vowed to, than make a vow and not fulfill it. Verse 8, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and right, do not be amazed at the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But all things considered, this is an advantage for a king, for a land, a king for a plowed field. Now 3 short aphorisms. The lover of money will not be satisfied with money, nor the lover of wealth with gain. This is also vanity. When goods increase, those who eat them increase, and what gain has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of laborers, whether they eat little or much, but the servant of the rich will not let them sleep. I think we're going to continue on to 17. There is a grievous ill that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owners to their own hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And though they are the parents of children, they have nothing in their hands. And as they came from the mother's womb, so shall they go again naked as they came. They shall take nothing away, nothing for their toil, which they may carry away with their hands. This is also a grievous ill. Just as they came, so shall they go. What gain do they have from toiling for the wind? Besides, all their days they eat in darkness, in much vexation, sickness, and resentment. That is the description of a wealthy person. Probably not a description that we would make in this day and age. Let's go back to the very beginning there with 8. And this is one of his first times really to say, oppression happens. If you look at the land and you see a certain portion of the land, there's another good thing to remember. Each individual in every community, well, let me be clear, each male in every community should have had a share of land. Sometimes, because of economic stresses, because of bad weather, because of failed crops, the land is sold. Now there actually was, and I'm going to include this in Sunday's sermon, there actually was a system for the redistribution of land. It's called the Year of Jubilee, but it was never done. It was a system whereby, because Esther had to sell her family land to Martha, in the 50th year, Martha's family had to return to Esther that portion that had been sold, so that Esther's family could have a share in the land. So what he's talking about here is oppression by someone coming in and taking as much land as they can. And that leaves everyone else impoverished, because you can't sustain yourself if you don't have land. You must have a share in the land. And in Israel, that's what it meant to be a son of David, was to have a share in the land. So that he starts out saying, if you see this kind of oppression, don't be surprised. It does happen. And yet he says, again, this is another indication that his heart is trained in his religion and his faith, not just in his mental activity. But he says every master has a master over him and a master over him, which is a way of him saying that there is an orderedness to our society, and right ordering will eventually come to be. He's outraged by well, maybe he's not outraged. He says that this kind of oppression exists. He doesn't claim to be a prophet, and he doesn't use his words in a prophetic way. He doesn't rail against the oppressors. He simply says there's a structure, there's there's somebody over everybody, and the higher ones will eventually straighten everything out. And the highest person then is, of course, the king, and that person is accountable to God. Verse 9, I wonder if this is the genesis of the NPR news radio thing, all things considered, but it's right there in scripture. So, all things considered, it's better to have a king. It's better to have one person at the top, and this is a longing for justice. It's not really a cry for the king to be the renewer of justice. Then there were those 3 little short aphorisms about the love of money, the continual fascination with getting more and more and more, and the contentment of the poor versus the anxiety of the wealthy. It's nice to think about, but because few of us have the kind of wealth that may keep us up all night worrying about the massiveness of our holdings, it's not too easy for us to relate to. 13 through 17 is the worst case scenario for the wealthy person, and that is something happens and all your wealth goes. You had worked and worked and worked, and then you've got nothing. Naked you came in, naked you shall leave. And yet it doesn't really matter whether you amassed a lot in your life or you had a little in your life. If you will end your life basically naked, you will be put into the ground, you will die. And that becomes then the springboard for his last affirmation. I'm going to read beginning at 18 to the end. This is what I have seen to be good. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of the life God gives us, for this is our lot. Likewise, all to whom God gives wealth and possessions and whom he enables to enjoy them and to accept their lot and find enjoyment in their toil, for this is the gift of God. They will scarcely brood over the days of their lives because God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts. Of all the vain and tragic dimensions of human existence, there is something good under the sun, namely the 3 gifts of like a trinity of delight, of eating, now that's a gift I enjoy, of drinking, being refreshed by water, and of enjoying one's life, one's toil, one's work. That is over against a life fraught with resentment and anxiety and too muchness. The teacher is really offering a way to contentment. Be content with the lot that you have been given. This is almost the backside of that envy that we had in the previous chapter. Instead of keeping your eye on Victor all the time to see that he's getting more than I'm getting, instead of doing that, why don't I just let Victor enjoy his life and me find out how I might enjoy my life as well? For this teacher, enjoyment is a serious matter. The worst case for anyone would be to scowl all the time, to be grim all the time. To find joy, to receive the joy that God is giving, that's what the wise person does.